The air in Black Canyon at 3 in the morning is a different element. It is not air as you know it. It is a solid thing, a block of cooled stone that carries the ghost scent of creosote and baked rock, the faint metallic tang of ionized dust kicked up by the day's tourists. The moon, a sliver of bone-white calcium, does little to challenge the darkness. It only serves to trace the immense, curved lip of the dam, a line drawn by a celestial architect against a canvas of infinite black. This is where you must come to understand it. Not in the glare of the Nevada sun, not with the cacophony of tour buses and the chatter of sightseers, but here, in the profound, crushing silence. The silence is the first lie. The structure before you, this monolith of human will, is anything but silent. It hums, a deep, resonant baritone that vibrates up through the soles of your shoes, through your bones, a constant reminder of the leviathan it holds captive. Tons of water, the entire weight of a tamed river, pressing, always pressing, against 4.4 million cubic yards of concrete. It is the sound of unimaginable power held in perfect, terrifying equilibrium. From this vantage point, it is sublime. A monument to order, to logic, to the belief that nature is a problem to be solved with slide rules and dynamite. The graceful Art Deco flourishes, the winged figures of the Republic, all speak of a future perfected, a utopian vision cast in bronze and stone. But lean closer. Listen past the hum of the turbines. What you hear is the echo of a different kind of noise. The roar of explosions, the shriek of metal on rock, the cacophony of 10,000 men shouting in a dozen languages, their voices swallowed by the canyon's sheer walls. This is the central paradox of the Hoover Dam. It is America's great 20th century cathedral, built to broadcast a message of strength and resilience to a nation on its knees. Yet, it was constructed in a crucible of desperation, a place where human life was a currency as cheap as sand. It is a monument to optimism built with the mortar of despair. It is a symbol of life-giving water, erected on a bed of uncounted graves. To look upon it in the quiet dark is to ask a fundamental question. When a nation decides to build a god, who is sacrificed upon its altar? The walls do not speak, but the story is there, sealed deep within the aggregate, in the very molecules of the thing itself. It is a story not just of engineering, but of human endurance and human expendability. A story of a thirsty desert, a raging river, and a country so broken it was willing to pay any price to believe in itself again. The trap was built to look like a salvation. Before the concrete, there was only the river, the Colorado. It was not a river in the gentle, pastoral sense. It was a geological force, a liquid battering ram born of mountain snowmelt, charging more than 1,400 miles to the sea. For centuries, it was a creator and a destroyer in equal measure. It carved canyons of breathtaking scale, its silt-building fertile deltas. But it was also a beast of unpredictable rage. In the spring, it would swell, a torrent of red-brown water. The Spanish called it Rio Colorado, the Red River, carrying entire trees, boulders, and the debris of the high country in its maw. It would overflow its banks for miles, inundating fledgling farms, washing away railroad tracks, obliterating the tiny footholds of civilization that dared to encroach upon its domain. It was the great, unsolved problem of the American Southwest, a region of immense potential, rich in minerals and blessed with year-round sun, but held hostage by the twin demons of drought and flood. The river was both the potential savior and the constant threat. To the nascent cities of Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and Phoenix, it was a taunt, a massive artery of fresh water flowing through one of the driest places on the planet. Yet it was too wild to be tapped, too violent to be trusted. Engineers and dreamers had looked at the Colorado for decades, seeing not a river, but a machine waiting to be built. Arthur Powell Davis, director of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, sketched out the vision as early as 1922. It was a vision of staggering ambition, a dam of unprecedented size, a structure so massive it would not only stop the floods but create a vast reservoir, a liquid savings account to be drawn upon during the dry years. It would generate hydroelectric power on a scale the world had never seen, enough to fuel the growth of the entire region for a century. It was a project born of the progressive era's faith in technocracy, the belief that any problem, no matter how immense, could be solved with enough steel, concrete, and human ingenuity. But by the time the vision gained political traction, the national mood had soured. The Roaring Twenties had ended not with a bang, but with the sickening silence of shuttered factories and breadlines. The Great Depression had gripped the country, eroding not just its wealth, but its very sense of self. The nation was paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. The American dream felt like a cruel joke. It was in this climate of profound national insecurity that the Boulder Canyon Project Act was passed. The dam was no longer just an infrastructure project. It became a symbol, a declaration of war against despair itself. Herbert Hoover, the engineer-president, saw it as a testament to American individualism and rugged enterprise, a way to prove that the system, though battered, was not broken. It was a psychological project as much as an engineering one. The goal was to build something so impossibly large, so undeniably powerful, that it would shock the nation back to life. It was a message to be written in concrete across the face of the desert. We are not finished. We can still conquer nature. We can still build monuments to our own greatness. The vision was pure, clean, and abstract, a beautiful blueprint of progress. The reality would be anything but. The river, the Red Bull of the desert, would not be tamed without a fight, and the desert itself was a formidable, merciless adversary. The vision required a machine of men, and the desert was waiting to break them. The place they chose was called Black Canyon. The name was not poetic hyperbole. It was a simple geological fact. The walls were sheer, jagged faces of volcanic andesite, scorched to a near black by millennia of unrelenting sun. In the summer, the canyon became a convection oven. The rock walls would absorb the desert heat all day, then radiate it back through the night, offering no reprieve. Temperatures could soar to 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade. But there was no shade. The air was thin and dry, leaching moisture from the body with every breath. The ground was a hostile terrain of sharp rock, sand, and venomous creatures. Rattlesnakes, Gila monsters, scorpions. This was the landscape upon which America would stage its comeback. This was the crucible where the national spirit would be reforged. But first, the men had to arrive. They came from every corner of a broken country. They were farmers from Oklahoma whose land had turned to dust and blown away. They were factory workers from Detroit and Chicago whose assembly lines had fallen silent. They were miners from Colorado whose pits had been shuttered. They were clerks, teachers, and small business owners who had lost everything in the crash. They were a legion of the dispossessed, drawn to the Nevada desert by a rumor of work, a government project so vast it would need thousands of hands. For these men, the promise of a steady paycheck, even a meager one, was a form of salvation. They piled their families and their few remaining possessions into sputtering Model T Fords and headed west, chasing a mirage of government-funded hope. When they arrived, they found nothing. There was no town, no barracks, no infrastructure. There was only the desert, the canyon, and the promise. The federal government had authorized the project, but the contract to build the dam was awarded to a consortium of 6 large construction firms, a powerful entity that would become known simply as the Six Companies. It was a syndicate of titans, experts in building bridges, tunnels, and railways. They were masters of logistics, capital, and heavy machinery. They were not, however, in the business of social welfare. Their primary objective was to build the dam on time and under budget. The well-being of the workforce was a secondary and distant concern. So the first arrivals created their own settlement, a desperate, sprawling shantytown that became known as Ragtown. It was a city of cardboard, scrap metal, and burlap sacks, clinging to the banks of the river. There was no clean water, no sanitation. Families of 5 and 6 crammed into makeshift tents, enduring the suffocating heat of the day and the surprising chill of the desert night. Disease was rampant. Dysentery and typhoid spread through the contaminated water supply. The conditions were medieval, a stark, brutal contrast to the gleaming modern future the dam was supposed to represent. This was the invisible foundation of the project. Before the first stick of dynamite was used, before the first yard of rock was excavated, The human cost was already being tallied in the squalor of Ragtown. The men were not pioneers in the romantic sense. They were refugees, economic exiles in their own country, willing to endure almost any hardship for the chance to work. The 6 companies knew this. They understood the power of desperation. It was their greatest tool. It meant they could set the wages, dictate the terms, and ignore the most basic safety precautions, because for every man who quit or died, there were 100 more waiting in the heat, praying for his job. The machine needed a city. Ragtown was an embarrassment, a visible scar of human misery that complicated the clean narrative of national renewal. The 6 companies, in conjunction with the federal government, needed a place to house their workforce that was orderly, controlled, and, above all, segregated. They would build a model town from scratch, a planned community carved out of the desert scrubland 7 miles from the canyon. They called it Boulder City. It was to be a beacon of modern living, a testament to the project's enlightened ideals. It had paved streets, electricity, schools, a hospital, and small, neat houses for the managers, engineers, and skilled white workers. It was clean, manicured, and utterly devoid of the chaos of a normal town. There was no alcohol allowed, no gambling, no prostitution. The 6 companies controlled every aspect of life, from the rent to the price of milk at the company store. It was less a community and more a component of the larger construction apparatus, a place to recharge the human batteries before plugging them back into the worksite. But Boulder City was a carefully curated illusion. For the vast majority of the workforce, particularly the unskilled laborers and the few non-white workers permitted on the project, the model town was a paradise they could only see from a distance. The company controlled who could live within its pristine borders. Most of the men were housed in temporary, primitive barracks closer to the canyon, 8 men to a room, with no cooling in the brutal summer months. The segregation was stark and absolute. Federal contracts at the time contained clauses that explicitly barred the employment of Mongolian, meaning Chinese, labor. Black workers, though hired, were not permitted to live in Boulder City. They were forced to build their own settlement miles away, a collection of shacks known as Railroad Pass. They worked the dirtiest, most dangerous jobs and were paid the lowest wages. The hierarchy of the dam was reflected in its geography. At the top were the federal bureaucrats and 6 companies' executives in their comfortable homes. Below them, the skilled white laborers in their modest company houses. Further down, the unskilled whites in the sweltering barracks. And at the very bottom, the black workers exiled to the margins, their labor essential but their presence unwelcome. This rigid social infrastructure was designed for one purpose: control. By creating a system of privilege and exclusion, the 6 companies could quell dissent and prevent solidarity among the workers. The promise of a better bunkhouse or a chance to move one's family into Boulder City was a powerful incentive to work harder, complain less, and ignore the flagrant safety violations. The city was a symbol not of an enlightened future, but of a ruthlessly efficient corporate feudalism. It demonstrated that while the dam was a federal project, its execution was governed by the cold calculus of profit. The human element was just another variable to be managed, another resource to be exploited in the relentless drive to conquer the river. The neat lawns and tidy sidewalks of Boulder City were a facade, a carefully constructed stage set designed to hide the grim realities of the production happening just a few miles away in the depths of the canyon. The real city wasn't made of wood and stucco. It was a transient metropolis of sweat, dust, and fear. The first task was not to build up, but to tear down. To clear the way for the foundations of the dam, the canyon walls had to be stripped of all loose rock and debris. It was a job for which no machine had yet been invented. It required men. Men who were not afraid of heights, who were nimble, and who were desperate enough to do the work. They were called high-scalers. They were the daredevils of the project, a strange aristocracy of risk-takers in a workforce defined by drudgery. Each morning, they would be lowered over the canyon rim, suspended 800 feet above the raging river on nothing more than a thin rope tied to a precarious anchor. Dangling in the abyss, with the wind whipping around them, their job was to scramble across the sheer rock face, planting dynamite in fissures and prying loose, unstable boulders with heavy iron bars. They were human pendulums, swinging back and forth across the cliffside. The work was breathtakingly dangerous. A frayed rope, a misplaced step, a falling rock from above. Any of these could mean instant death. The men developed a gallows humor and a swagger born of cheating death on a daily basis. They wore hard hats, a recent innovation, but these offered little protection from a multi-ton slab of rock breaking loose. Their real protection was a combination of agility, instinct, and blind luck. Below them, in the canyon floor, the process of diverting the river began. For massive tunnels, each 56 feet in diameter, had to be blasted through the solid rock of the canyon walls, 2 on the Nevada side and 2 on the Arizona side. These would serve as temporary channels for the Colorado, allowing the work site in the riverbed to be sealed off and pumped dry. The tunnel work was a different kind of hell from the high scaling. It was dark, subterranean, and suffocating. The noise was constant and deafening. The percussive chatter of dozens of compressed air drills, the roar of dynamite blasts, the grinding of machinery. The air was thick with silica dust from the pulverized rock, a fine, sharp powder that coated the lungs and would, for many, lead to a slow, agonizing death from silicosis years later. But the most immediate danger was the exhaust from the gasoline-powered trucks used to haul away the rubble, the muck. The tunnels were poorly ventilated, and the carbon monoxide levels quickly built up to lethal concentrations. Men would stumble out of the tunnel mouths, gasping for air, their faces pale, their bodies racked with nausea. Many collapsed on the spot. The 6 companies officially listed the cause of death as pneumonia, a diagnosis that absolved them of any liability. The workers knew the truth. They called it the pneumonia, a bitter, ironic euphemism for acute carbon monoxide poisoning. The men who died in the tunnels were choking to death on the company's negligence. The pace was relentless. Frank Crow, the general superintendent for the 6 companies, was a man obsessed with speed. He drove his men with a merciless intensity, implementing a system of bonuses for the crews who could drill and blast the fastest. It was a brilliant strategy for productivity that turned the worksite into a brutal competition. Safety was a casualty of speed. The pressure to drill faster, blast quicker, and haul more muck meant corners were cut. Men grew exhausted, their judgment impaired. Accidents became commonplace. The work in the tunnels and on the canyon walls was a war of attrition, pitting human flesh and bone against millions of tons of ancient rock. It was a necessary prelude, the violent terraforming required before the act of creation could begin. But for the men who did the work, it was a daily descent into a man-made inferno, a place where the air was poison and the sky was a distant, unreachable square of blue. The river had been diverted. The coffer dams were in place, holding back the mighty Colorado. The canyon floor was pumped dry, exposing the bedrock for the first time in millennia. The stage was set for the main event, the pouring of the concrete. This was the heart of the project, the colossal task of creating the structure itself. And it introduced a new set of challenges, a new kind of hell for the workers. Concrete generates heat as it cures, an exothermic reaction that releases chemical energy. A dam the size of Hoover, if poured in a single continuous block, would have generated so much heat that it would have taken over 125 years to cool. The internal stress from this heat would have caused it to crack and crumble before it was even finished. The engineers devised an ingenious solution. The dam would be built not as one solid piece, but as a series of interlocking, rectangular columns, like a giant set of building blocks. A network of more than 582 miles of 1-inch steel pipe was embedded within the concrete, creating a massive refrigeration system. River water and later refrigerated water was pumped through these pipes, drawing the heat out of the curing concrete and artificially aging it. It was a brilliant feat of thermal engineering. For the men on the ground, it meant working inside a vast, shadowy, and perpetually growing concrete labyrinth. The work never stopped. The concrete was mixed in plants on the canyon rim and delivered down to the site in massive, 8-cubic-yard buckets that flew through the air on a network of overhead cables. The bucket would descend from the heavens, a steel behemoth that could crush a man without even registering the impact. Men known as puddlers stood deep within the wooden forms of the rising columns, their job to guide the flow of the wet concrete, spreading it evenly with shovels and vibrating tools to eliminate air pockets. It was grueling, monotonous work in a surreal environment. They were entombed in a world of gray slush, the air thick with cement dust, the sun blotted out by the rising walls around them. The danger was constant. A misstep could send a man plunging into a deep form, to be buried alive in tons of wet concrete. The official records claim no man was ever sealed into the dam, but the myth persists, a testament to the primal fear the work instilled. The noise was a physical assault. The rumble of the vibrators, the clang of the buckets, the shouts of the foreman. It all echoed off the narrow concrete walls, creating a disorienting and exhausting soundscape. The refrigeration pipes, while a technical marvel, created their own hazards. They leaked icy water, creating slick, treacherous surfaces and drenching the workers in the cold, even as the ambient temperature in the canyon soared. It was a world of jarring sensory contrasts. The searing desert heat just beyond the canyon rim and the chilling dampness within the forms. The blinding sunlight above and the perpetual twilight below. The dam was rising, a testament to human control over nature. But for the men at the bottom, it was an alien landscape, a geometric forest of concrete and steel that seemed to be growing of its own accord. They were not builders in the traditional sense. They were human cogs in a vast, unceasing industrial process. The concrete never slept, and neither did the men. 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. The machine demanded constant feeding, and the price was their exhaustion, their health, and sometimes their lives. The summer of 1931 was a season of reckoning. The initial wave of desperate optimism that had carried the men to Black Canyon had evaporated in the merciless heat. The reality of the 6 companies' indifference to their well-being had set in. Wages were low, the work was lethal, and the company town of Boulder City was a distant dream for most. The men were being pushed to their breaking point. The heat in the canyon was unbearable, a physical torment that led to heat stroke and exhaustion. Men would collapse on the job, their bodies simply giving out. The drinking water provided by the company was often tepid and transported in barrels that had previously held oil or other contaminants. The food in the company mess hall was poor. But the greatest source of anger was the company's utter disregard for safety. The pneumonia deaths in the tunnels were mounting, and everyone knew the real cause was carbon monoxide. There was a pervasive sense that the 6 companies viewed them not as men, but as disposable parts. The discontent simmered, then boiled over. On August 7, 1931, the workers laid down their tools. They organized, drawing up a list of demands. Better pay, clean water, flushing toilets instead of chemical latrines, and strict enforcement of safety regulations, particularly in the tunnels. It was a bold move. The Great Depression was raging, and for every man on strike, there were dozens of unemployed men waiting at the edge of the desert, ready to take his place. The 6 companies knew this, and their response was swift and brutal. Frank Crow, the superintendent, refused to negotiate. He saw the strike not as a labor dispute, but as an act of insubordination against the great national project. The company brought in strikebreakers, armed guards, and local law enforcement. They issued an ultimatum: go back to work under the existing conditions, or be fired and permanently blacklisted from the project. Eviction notices were served to the strikers living in company housing. The power of the state and the power of the corporation merged into a single, unyielding force. The strikers were outmaneuvered and overpowered. They had no union backing, no political support, and no financial resources to sustain a long fight. Their desperation had been the company's greatest weapon in hiring them, and now it was the weapon that would break them. Within days, the strike collapsed. The leaders were fired and run out of the canyon. The rest of the men, facing starvation and homelessness, trudged back to work. The company had won an absolute victory. But the strike, though a failure, was not without consequence. It drew unwanted national attention to the horrific conditions at the dam site. The press began to report on the slave camp in the desert. The federal government, embarrassed by the publicity, was forced to intervene, albeit weakly. Some minor concessions were made. The company agreed to improve ventilation in the tunnels and freeze the wages they had been trying to cut. But the fundamental power dynamic remained unchanged. The strike revealed the raw, ugly truth behind the patriotic veneer of the Hoover Dam. It was a project fueled by corporate greed and worker exploitation. It showed that the rugged individualism President Hoover so admired was, for the men at the bottom, simply the freedom to work in lethal conditions or starve. The concrete continued to rise, the turbines would eventually spin, and the nation would celebrate its great achievement. But the memory of the failed strike would remain, a ghost of defiance in the machine, a reminder that the great monument to American progress was built by men who had been stripped of their own. The official death toll for the Hoover Dam is 96. It is a clean, manageable number, a statistic that can be printed on a plaque, a regrettable but acceptable cost for a project of such magnitude. This number, however, is a carefully constructed fiction. It is the first and perhaps the greatest lie of the dam. The official count only includes men who were pronounced dead on the worksite itself. It does not include the men who died of their injuries later in the hospital. It does not include the men who died in the squalor of Ragtown from disease and malnutrition. Most significantly, it does not include the hundreds of men who died from what the six companies disingenuously labeled pneumonia. The men who choked to death on carbon monoxide in the diversion tunnels are not on the list. The men who inhaled silica dust day after day and died years later, their lungs hardened to stone, are not on the list. The true number of fatalities is unknown and unknowable, lost to a combination of corporate malfeasance and the transient nature of the workforce. By some estimates, the real toll is many hundreds higher. Each of these uncounted deaths represents a failure, a life sacrificed for speed and profit. The individual stories are almost entirely lost. They were simply names on a payroll, numbers on a coroner's report. There was J.G. Tierney, a surveyor for the Bureau of Reclamation, who was one of a group looking for an ideal spot for the dam. He was caught in a flash flood and drowned in the Colorado River on December 20, 1922. He is often cited as the first man to die on the project. In a chilling, almost novelistic symmetry, the last official death was his own son, Patrick W. Tierney, who fell from one of the intake towers 13 years to the day later, on December 20, 1935. This neat, tragic bookend provides a semblance of narrative closure to the story of the dam's human cost. But it is a misleading closure. The deaths were not poetic or symmetrical. They were brutal, chaotic, and often preventable. Men were crushed by falling equipment. They were blasted by premature dynamite explosions. They were swept away by the river. They fell from the canyon walls. They were electrocuted. They were run over by trucks. The worksite was a landscape of industrial violence. Every stage of construction brought its own unique form of death. The high-scalers faced the constant threat of a long fall. The tunnel workers faced poison gas. The concrete pourers faced being buried alive. The sheer scale and speed of the operation created an environment where the individual worker was dwarfed by the machinery and the monumental task at hand. He became an abstraction, a unit of labor. The company hospital in Boulder City was efficient at patching men up and sending them back to the line, but it was also efficient at managing the official records, ensuring that the company's liability was minimized. The causes of death were often obscured by vague medical terminology. The real story of the dam is written not just in the 96 official names, but in the countless unmarked graves and the forgotten families who received a final, meager paycheck and a brief, impersonal letter of condolence. The dam stands today as a symbol of human achievement, but it is also a cenotaph, a monument to the nameless dead whose sacrifice was deemed a necessary expense. The hum of its turbines is a constant requiem for the men who were consumed by its creation. Amidst the grit, the danger, and the raw industrial power, an unexpected aesthetic began to emerge. The dam was not just a brute force exercise in engineering. It was also intended to be a work of art, a monument for the ages. The federal government, recognizing the project's symbolic importance, hired the Los Angeles-based architect Gordon B. Kaufman to consult on its final appearance. Kaufman, known for his elegant residential and commercial designs, was tasked with softening the dam's immense, brutalist form. He collaborated with the artist Alan Tupper True and the sculptor Oscar J.W. Hansen to imbue the structure with a sense of grandeur and meaning. The result was a stunning and unexpected fusion of modern engineering and Art Deco style. The 4 intake towers, rising like sentinels from the surface of the future lake, were given sleek, futuristic lines and abstract clock faces. The spillways were gracefully curved. The powerhouse at the base of the dam, a cathedral of energy, was designed with an interior that defied its industrial function. Here, Kaufman and True created a masterpiece of color and form. The floors were not bare concrete but intricate terrazzo tiles, inlaid with stunning mosaics based on Native American motifs. The designs depicted scenes of mountains, rain, and lightning, paying homage to the very natural forces the dam was designed to control. The turbines themselves, massive green-hued behemoths, were arranged in a long, cathedral-like hall, their gleaming surfaces and polished railings creating a sense of order and almost religious reverence for the power they generated. It was a temple dedicated to the new god of electricity. On the crest of the dam, Oscar Hansen installed his 2 monumental bronze sculptures, the winged figures of the Republic. These seated, godlike figures 30 feet tall are not angels. Their wings are stretched straight, parallel to their bodies, symbolizing the harnessing of power rather than flight. Their purpose, according to Hansen, was to be a tribute to the builders of the dam, a silent, eternal acknowledgement of the labor that had raised the structure from the canyon floor. At their base, a terrazzo star map celestial chart marks the precise date of the dam's dedication, an attempt to fix this human achievement within the vastness of cosmic time. This artistic overlay serves a crucial purpose. It transforms the dam from a mere piece of infrastructure into a cultural artifact. It provides a narrative, a language of beauty and permanence that helps to obscure the messy, brutal reality of its construction. The elegant lines and symbolic artwork invite the viewer to contemplate abstract ideals: progress, nationhood, the taming of nature, rather than the lives of the men who were crushed, poisoned, and broken in the canyon below. The gleaming terrazzo floors of the powerhouse are beautiful, but they are also a polished surface that reflects a sanitized version of history. They cover the bedrock where men toiled in mud and danger. The winged figures are majestic, but their silent, bronze gaze looks out over a landscape that was once a chaotic worksite of noise, dust, and death. The Art Deco flourishes are a magnificent facade, a beautiful mask placed upon the face of a machine that was built with human lives. They are a testament not only to the artistic vision of their creators, but also to the power of aesthetics to shape memory and mythologize a difficult past. The machine was more than just concrete and steel. It was a complex ecosystem of capital, politics, and public relations. The 6 companies was not a single entity but a joint venture of some of the most powerful construction and engineering firms in the American West: Utah Construction Company, Henry J. Kaiser and W. A. Bechtel Company, McDonald and Kahn, Morrison Knudsen, J. F. Shea Company, and Pacific Bridge Company. This consortium was a triumph of American capitalism. By pooling their resources, expertise, and political influence, they were able to take on a project of a scale no single company could have managed. Their winning bid for the project was $48,890,955. It was the largest single government contract of its time, a staggering sum in the depths of the Depression. The men who ran these companies were archetypes of the era: ambitious, ruthless, and brilliant innovators in the field of heavy construction. Men like Henry J. Kaiser, who would later become famous for building Liberty ships during World War II, and Frank Crowe, the superintendent who viewed the canyon as a personal adversary. They were masters of logistics, moving mountains of material and legions of men with brutal efficiency. Their profit was directly tied to their speed. Every day saved on the construction schedule was a day they didn't have to pay their massive workforce, adding millions to their bottom line. This relentless focus on the schedule was the driving force behind the hazardous working conditions. Safety measures cost time and money. Proper ventilation, safer equipment, and more reasonable work hours would have eaten into their profit margins. The federal government, under the Bureau of Reclamation, was officially overseeing the project. They were the client, the ones who had drawn up the plans and secured the funding. But their oversight was often lax. The government's primary goal was to see the dam completed, to deliver on the political promise of jobs and progress. They were reluctant to interfere too aggressively with the six companies' methods, fearing it would slow down the work. This created a dynamic where the private contractors held most of the power on the ground. They controlled the town, the jobs, and the flow of information. When journalists or government inspectors came to visit, they were given carefully managed tours, shown the impressive engineering marvels while the grim realities of the worksite were kept out of view. The dam was also a powerful tool of political propaganda. The government released a steady stream of press releases, photographs, and newsreels celebrating the heroic progress in Black Canyon. The imagery was always carefully selected. Vast, sweeping shots of the rising concrete walls, powerful machines in action, and smiling, determined workers. The narrative was one of American grit and ingenuity triumphing over both the Depression and the forces of nature. There was no room in this story for carbon monoxide poisoning, failed strikes, or segregated shantytowns. The dam became a national obsession, a source of pride for a country starved for good news. The public consumed the myth eagerly, wanting to believe in the story of the great dam that was saving America. This complex interplay of corporate profit, government ambition, and public perception created the perfect environment for the exploitation of the workforce. The workers were trapped at the bottom of a massive pyramid, their individual voices drowned out by the roar of the machinery and the powerful narrative being crafted by those at the top. The bills kept coming, and the concrete kept rising, burying the truth under its immense weight. The completion of the dam was not a single moment, but a series of milestones, each one a victory in the war against the river. In February 1935, the diversion tunnels were sealed. For the first time in its recorded history, the lower Colorado River ceased to flow. The water began to back up behind the dam, slowly, inexorably, beginning the multi-year process of filling the vast canyon system that would become Lake Mead. This was a moment of profound and irreversible change. The landscape that had been home to Native American tribes for centuries, the canyons that had been explored by John Wesley Powell, the very riverbed where the dam's foundations were laid, all began to disappear beneath the rising, silent water. The creation of the lake was an act of erasure. It submerged not just the natural geography, but also the recent history of the struggle. The coffer dams, the temporary bridges, the remnants of the construction railway, the very ground where men had lived and died, were all consigned to a watery grave. The lake's placid, turquoise surface would become a new facade, hiding the violence of the dam's birth. The dam was completed on March 1, 1936, 2 years ahead of schedule. Frank Crow's obsession with speed had paid off, delivering a massive financial bonus to the six companies. The final structure was a thing of awe. 726 feet high, 1,244 feet long at its crest, a soaring, brilliant white curve of concrete wedged into the black rock of the canyon. It contained enough concrete to pave a 2-lane highway from San Francisco to New York City. The dedication ceremony took place earlier, on September 30, 1935, presided over by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It was a moment thick with political irony. The dam, which had been authorized and begun under President Herbert Hoover and originally known as the Boulder Dam, was a project he had championed as a symbol of his vision for America. But by 1935, Hoover was a politically toxic figure, widely blamed for the Great Depression. Roosevelt, the architect of the New Deal, was the new face of American hope. In his dedication speech, Roosevelt celebrated the dam as a triumph of collective action and government planning, a stark contrast to Hoover's philosophy of rugged individualism. He spoke of the dam as a great national achievement and a symbol of a new era. In a deliberate and politically charged act, he never once mentioned Herbert Hoover's name. The man whose name the dam would eventually bear was written out of its triumphant dedication. The ceremony marked the official turning point. The dam was no longer a work site. It was a monument. The story of its creation was already being simplified, sanitized, and mythologized. The focus shifted from the brutal process of its construction to the clean, limitless power it would generate. The complex, messy history of labor strife, death, and exploitation was being paved over by a grand narrative of national triumph. The machine was finished. The illusion of permanence was complete. The dam had become a symbol, and symbols have no room for inconvenient truths. The water rose, the turbines began to spin, and the memory of what it took to build the concrete god began to recede, like the river itself, held back by the immense weight of the official story. With the creation of Lake Mead, the dam became more than just a power source. It became a recreational paradise. The largest man-made reservoir in the United States, its deep blue waters and intricate, canyon-lined shores created a stunning, surreal contrast with the surrounding Mojave Desert. An entirely new economy, one based on tourism and leisure, sprang up around its edges. Marinas, hotels, and casinos emerged from the desert dust, catering to a newly mobile American public eager to see the great engineering marvel and enjoy the aquatic playground it had created. The dam transformed from a symbol of hard labor into a destination for relaxation. People who had once read about the dam in newspapers as a desperate Depression-era project now came to water ski, fish, and sunbathe on its shores. The irony was profound. The very water that had drowned the worksite and erased the memory of the struggle was now the primary attraction. The placid surface of the lake became a mirror that reflected only the clear desert sky, not the history buried in its depths. The dam itself became one of America's premier tourist attractions. Guided tours took visitors deep into its concrete heart, showcasing the immense power and ingenious engineering. They walked through the cool, clean tunnels, a stark contrast to the poison-filled diversion tunnels they replaced, and marveled at the colossal turbines in the powerhouse. The tour guides told a story of vision, genius, and national pride. They spoke of Frank Crowe and the brilliant engineers. They recited statistics about the volume of concrete and the megawatts of electricity. The story of the common laborer, if mentioned at all, was framed in the heroic, sanitized language of sacrifice for the greater good. The 96 official deaths were presented as a sad but noble cost of progress. The complex history was flattened into a simple, inspiring tale. The upstairs/downstairs dynamic that had defined the construction period was replicated in the tourist experience. Visitors saw the magnificent, Art Deco-adorned upstairs, the public-facing spaces designed to inspire awe. The dangerous, dirty, and chaotic downstairs of the construction era was gone, either demolished or submerged forever. The dam had successfully transitioned from a machine of production to a theater of national identity. It performed its own history for a paying audience, presenting a carefully edited version of the past. This transformation was the final victory of the official narrative. The dam's physical reality, its sheer scale and undeniable power, lent an air of unquestionable truth to the stories that were told about it. It was difficult to stand in its shadow and question the myth. The structure itself seemed to demand reverence, not scrutiny. The hum of the turbines became the dominant sound, drowning out the faint, ghostly echoes of the dynamite blasts and the cries of the men who had built it. The monument had become its own most powerful piece of propaganda, a silent, concrete testament to a history it had helped to rewrite. For decades, the dam performed its function flawlessly. It was the linchpin of the American Southwest, the silent, reliable servant that made modern life in the desert possible. Its turbines spun, powering the glittering lights of Las Vegas and the sprawling suburbs of Los Angeles. Its reservoirs provided the water that allowed desert cities to bloom and vast tracts of arid land to be transformed into productive farmland. It stood as a symbol of permanence, a monument to the idea that human ingenuity could impose its will upon the natural world indefinitely. It was a machine that had tamed a river, conquered a desert, and defeated a depression. It seemed infallible, an eternal testament to the era of its creation. But the 21st century brought with it a new adversary, one that could not be defeated with dynamite and concrete. A changing climate and a series of prolonged, historic droughts began to starve the Colorado River at its source. The snowpack in the Rocky Mountains, the river's lifeblood, dwindled. The flow of water into the vast reservoir system slowed to a trickle of its former self. The illusion of permanence began to crack. A new visual marker of the dam's story appeared, a stark and ominous symbol of its vulnerability. On the canyon walls surrounding Lake Mead, a bathtub ring began to grow. A band of white mineral deposits, stark against the red rock, showed the historic high water mark. With each passing year of drought, the lake's surface dropped further, and the white ring grew wider, a visible, ever-expanding record of the water that was no longer there. The dam, designed to control a mighty, raging river, was now managing a dwindling resource. The conversation around the structure began to shift. It was no longer just a symbol of past glory, but a focal point for present-day anxieties about water scarcity, climate change, and the long-term viability of the very civilization it had helped to create. The intake towers, once deep beneath the lake's surface, began to emerge, their full height exposed. The bodies of long-lost drowning victims, and even evidence of decades-old murders, were revealed as the water receded, as if the lake itself were giving up its ghosts. The dam, which had once been a symbol of absolute control, was becoming a symbol of the limits of that control. It demonstrated that even the most monumental feats of engineering are ultimately dependent on the natural systems they seek to harness. The concrete leviathan could manage the water, but it could not create it. The hubris of its creators was being laid bare by the relentless sun and the cloudless skies. The monument built to last for millennia was now a massive, beautiful, and increasingly worrying gauge of a deepening crisis. The turning point was no longer a moment in the past, but an ongoing process, a slow-motion unraveling of the certainties upon which the modern Southwest was built. The concrete god was mortal after all. The legacy of the Hoover Dam is a story of profound and unresolved contradictions. It is, without question, one of the greatest engineering achievements in human history. It stands as a powerful physical testament to the ambition, skill, and sheer audacity of its builders. It fundamentally remade the American Southwest, enabling the growth of some of the nation's largest and most dynamic cities. It provides clean, renewable energy and a water supply that supports millions of people and a vast agricultural industry. On this level, its success is undeniable. It is a machine that works, a promise that was, in large part, fulfilled. It is the physical embodiment of the belief that humanity can and should reshape the planet to meet its needs. It is a monument to the power of collective action and large-scale public works, a model that seems almost impossibly ambitious from the vantage point of the present day. But it is also a monument to a darker set of ideals. It is a monument to the belief that progress justifies any cost, that the lives of laborers are an expendable resource in the pursuit of a grand vision. It is a monument to corporate power and the exploitation of desperation. Its clean lines and majestic form hide a foundation of human suffering, a history of negligence and greed that has been deliberately and systematically obscured. The dam teaches us that the story of any great achievement is often built upon a parallel, invisible story of sacrifice. For every celebrated engineer, there were 1,000 anonymous puddlers. For every dollar of profit earned by the 6 companies, there was a family left grieving. Furthermore, its legacy is being actively rewritten by the environment itself. What was once a symbol of man's triumph over nature is increasingly becoming a symbol of nature's indifference to man. The shrinking of Lake Mead serves as a constant, visible reminder that our control is conditional and our resources are finite. The dam's very existence, which spurred massive population growth in an arid region, has created a civilization that is now profoundly vulnerable to the climate changes it helped to accelerate. It solved the problem of the river's floods, but in doing so, it created a new, more complex set of problems for future generations to face. It is a mirror reflecting our own complicated relationship with technology, power, and the environment. We can look at it and see the best of ourselves. Our ability to dream on a colossal scale, our ingenuity, our capacity for cooperation. But we must also see our hubris, our willingness to sacrifice the powerless for the benefit of the powerful, and our short-sightedness in the face of long-term consequences. The dam is not a simple story of triumph or tragedy. It is both. It is a beautiful, terrible, and necessary monument, a concrete god that gives life with one hand and serves as a warning with the other. Its true legacy is not written in the bronze plaques on its crest, but in the ongoing, unresolved debate about what it truly represents. The modern visitor to the Hoover Dam experiences a carefully curated spectacle. They drive across the Mike O'Callaghan Pat Tillman Memorial Bridge, a graceful arch of steel and concrete that soars high above the canyon, offering a breathtaking, panoramic view that was previously impossible. From this safe and sterile distance, the dam appears as a perfect, almost abstract form, a piece of sculpture set against the vastness of the desert. The raw, chaotic energy of its construction is entirely absent. The landscape is tidy, managed. The experience is one of aesthetic appreciation, a postcard moment. Down at the dam itself, the experience is similarly controlled. Visitors park in modern structures, buy tickets, and are guided through the sanitized interiors by professional storytellers. They learn about penstocks and turbines, about architectural vision and kilowatt hours. The narrative they receive is one of clean power and historic significance. It is a story of success. The questions of labor, of exploitation, of the uncounted dead are not part of the official tour. They are relegated to the footnotes of history, to be found only by those who actively seek them out. The dam has become a victim of its own success. Its flawless operation for nearly a century has made it seem inevitable, a natural part of the landscape. The immense struggle required to build it has faded from public memory, replaced by a simple appreciation for its iconic image. It has been absorbed into the national mythology, its rough edges smoothed over, its tragic stories silenced. It is a landmark, a photo opportunity, a line item in the budget of the Bureau of Reclamation. But the dam itself remains a silent witness. Its concrete face, streaked and weathered by the decades, has absorbed the sun of more than 30,000 days. It has felt the vibrations of every single turbine rotation. It has borne the immense, silent pressure of the lake, a weight that is both physical and metaphorical. The structure holds the memory of its own creation within its molecular bonds. It is a repository of stories that can no longer be told by human tongues. The puddlers are gone. The high-scalers are gone. Frank Crow and the 6 companies' executives are gone. Only the dam remains. To stand on its crest today is to stand at the intersection of multiple histories. There is the official history of triumphant engineering. There is the forgotten history of the human cost. And there is the unfolding history of our environmental future, a story being written in the declining water levels of Lake Mead. The legacy is not a fixed thing, but a living, evolving narrative. The dam is not merely an object from the past. It is an active participant in our present and a powerful, ominous oracle for our future. It forces us to confront the true cost of our ambitions and the ultimate consequences of the bargains we strike with the natural world. The heat of the Nevada day dissipates quickly as the sun falls below the canyon rim. The sky bleeds from orange to a deep, bruised purple. The lights on the dam flicker on, casting long, stark shadows across its curved face. The tourists depart, their cars snaking back towards the artificial oasis of Las Vegas, leaving the canyon to its profound and ancient silence. This is the time to see it. The hum of the turbines is more pronounced now, a low, resonant chant in the cool night air. It is the sound of the machine at work, tireless, sleepless. The water of Lake Mead, black and opaque under the emerging stars, presses against the concrete, a constant, patient force. It is a scene of immense, serene power. But the serenity is a lie. The structure is not at peace. It is a place of tension, a frozen moment in a war between human will and geological time. It is a monument built on a fault line, both literal and metaphorical. It holds back a river, but it also holds back a history of thousands of men, driven by desperation, who came to this desolate canyon to build a miracle. They were an invisible army, their individual faces and stories lost in the sheer scale of the undertaking. They worked in unthinkable conditions, for wages that barely kept their families from starvation. They breathed poisoned air, dangled from frayed ropes, and were crushed by the very machines that were supposed to symbolize progress. They were the fuel for the great engine of national renewal. Their sacrifice was the invisible mortar that binds the concrete blocks together. The dam stands as their unmarked tombstone, a monument so vast that it completely overshadows the men who built it. The winged figures of the Republic sit in their eternal bronze silence, a tribute to an abstract idea of labor, while the laborers themselves are forgotten. Is this the price of greatness? Is every monument to human achievement necessarily built on a foundation of human suffering? The Hoover Dam offers no easy answers. It simply stands, a massive concrete question mark in the middle of the desert. It is a symbol of both our highest aspirations and our most profound failures, a testament to our ability to dream and build on a colossal scale, and a chilling reminder of our willingness to sacrifice the few for the benefit of the many. The dam is not just a story about the past. It is a parable for the present, a warning about the future. It teaches us that the clean, efficient power we take for granted often has a dirty, hidden source. It reminds us that progress is a complicated, often brutal, process. And it warns us that our grandest designs, our most ambitious attempts to control our environment, are subject to laws far more powerful and permanent than our own. The hum of the turbines continues, a sound that is both a lullaby and a lament. The story of the dam begins and ends with the river. For millennia, the Colorado was a wild, untamable force of nature, carved its own path, obeyed its own laws. The dam was an act of rebellion against that natural order. It was a declaration that the river's time was over, and humanity's time had begun. The project was conceived in an era of supreme confidence, a time when it was believed that technology and engineering could solve any problem. The Great Depression, paradoxically, only strengthened this belief. The nation needed a tangible, overwhelming victory against the forces of chaos, and the untamed river was the perfect adversary. Conquering it would be a symbolic victory over economic despair itself. So they came, the engineers with their blueprints and the financiers with their capital. But the vision could only be realized through the application of raw human labor. The machine required an army, and a broken nation provided one. The men who built the Hoover Dam were not ideological pioneers. They were economic refugees. They were not building a utopia. They were trying to survive. They traded their health and safety for a few dollars a day, a bargain that seemed reasonable in a world that offered them nothing else. The 6 companies, the corporate entity that drove the project, understood this dynamic perfectly. They were not villains in a simple sense. They were masters of an industrial system that prioritized efficiency above all else. Men were a resource, like steel or gravel, to be used as efficiently as possible to achieve the desired outcome. The deaths, the injuries, the illnesses, these were calculated as acceptable losses, the unfortunate but necessary cost of doing business on an epic scale. The government, the supposed protector of the public good, was a willing accomplice. The need for a symbol of progress was so great that it was willing to overlook the brutal methods used to create it. The dam had to be built on time and on budget. The human cost was a detail to be managed, a public relations problem to be solved with sanitized press releases and carefully orchestrated dedication ceremonies. The result is the structure that stands today. A magnificent, terrifying monument to this complex and often brutal alliance of capital, state power, and human desperation. It is beautiful, yes, but that is just the facade. Behind the Art Deco flourishes and the breathtaking scale lies a history of profound exploitation. The dam is a testament to what we can achieve when we are united in a common purpose. But it is also a chilling reminder of who gets to define that purpose and who is forced to pay the price. The concrete walls refuse to speak of this history, but it is there in every cubic yard. The story is embedded in the structure, a silent, permanent record of the human energy that was consumed in its creation. What does it mean for a structure to outlive its purpose? Or, more accurately, for the world to change so profoundly that the structure's original purpose becomes a source of anxiety rather than security? The Hoover Dam was built to solve the problems of its time: flooding, the need for electricity in a burgeoning region, and a national crisis of confidence. By these metrics, it was an overwhelming success. It created a world of predictability and abundance in a place defined by scarcity and chaos. But the world it helped to create is now facing a new set of problems. Problems the dam cannot solve and may have inadvertently exacerbated. The very existence of a reliable water and power supply encouraged explosive population growth in the desert. Cities like Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Los Angeles grew into massive metropolises, all dependent on the continued, uninterrupted flow of resources from the Colorado River. The dam created a sense of security, a belief that the desert's natural limits had been permanently overcome. This was the great illusion. The dam did not create water. It only stored it, and the supply was never infinite. The current crisis, the megadrought that has seen Lake Mead shrink to historic lows, is exposing the fragility of this system. The bathtub ring around the lake is more than a curiosity. It is a warning sign, a graphic illustration of a system living beyond its means. The dam, once a symbol of boundless American optimism, is now becoming a symbol of our collective short-sightedness. It represents an entire philosophy of resource management that is being called into question. The idea that we can engineer our way out of any environmental constraint. The truth is that the dam is a brilliant but rigid solution to a dynamic and changing problem. It was designed for a 20th century climate, for a river that was, on average, much healthier than the river of today. It is a monument to a past reality, and it is struggling to adapt to a new one. The debates that now rage in the boardrooms of water authorities and the halls of government are a testament to this new reality. The 7 states that rely on the river are locked in contentious negotiations over who must cut their usage and by how much. The era of abundance is over. The era of painful choices has begun. The dam is at the center of this conflict, no longer a benevolent provider but a fulcrum of scarcity. Its legacy is being written in real time, not by historians but by hydrologists, climate scientists, and policymakers. The great concrete god of the desert, the machine that promised eternal order, is now presiding over a future of profound uncertainty. The men who were lowered into the canyon on ropes, the men who breathed the toxic air of the tunnels, the men who stood ankle-deep in wet concrete. What did they think they were building? Did they share the grand vision of the engineers and politicians? Did they see themselves as soldiers in a war against the Depression, building a brighter future for America? The historical record, the letters and diaries left behind, suggest a far more immediate and pragmatic perspective. They were not thinking about taming a river for posterity. They were thinking about the next paycheck. They were thinking about sending money home to a family on the brink of starvation. They were thinking about surviving the next shift, about avoiding the falling rock or the faulty equipment. Their horizon was not the next century, but the next meal. The grand narrative of the Hoover Dam, the story of national rebirth and technological triumph, was a story told by the men at the top, for an audience far away from the heat and the dust of Black Canyon. For the men on the ground, the reality was much simpler. It was a job, a dangerous, grueling, and often deadly job, but a job nonetheless, in a time when work of any kind was a blessing. This disconnect between the symbolic meaning of the project and the lived experience of the workers is at the heart of the dam's story. It represents a fundamental division in modern life, the division between those who design and profit from the great systems that shape our world, and those who are tasked with the physical, often perilous, labor of building and maintaining them. The dam is a monument to this division. Its clean, elegant crest, where tourists now stroll and admire the view, is a world away from the dark, chaotic canyon floor where the foundations were laid. It is the ultimate expression of the upstairs/downstairs, dynamic, writ in concrete on a geological scale. We celebrate the visionaries, the Frank Crows and the Gordon Kaufmans. We remember the politicians, the Hoovers and the Roosevelts. But the names of the thousands of men who formed the invisible army are lost. They were the anonymous, interchangeable parts of the great machine. Their individual hopes, fears, and stories were ground down and mixed into the aggregate, becoming part of the silent, monolithic whole. To remember the dam honestly is to remember this chasm. It is to acknowledge that the cost of a national symbol is not evenly distributed. The glory is concentrated at the top, while the sacrifice is borne by those at the bottom. The dam did, in a sense, help to save America. It provided jobs, power, and a much-needed psychological boost. but it also replicated the very inequalities and injustices that plagued the nation it was meant to heal. It was a New Deal project built with old-world exploitation, a modern marvel constructed with almost feudal labor practices. It is a mirror, reflecting not only the best of what we can build, but also the enduring, uncomfortable truths about how we build it. If you travel to Boulder City today, you will find a quiet, pleasant town, proud of its unique history. There are parks, museums, and bronze statues dedicated to the builders of the dam. The official narrative is everywhere. It is a story of courage, perseverance, and civic pride. The town sees itself as a living monument to the project, a testament to the order and prosperity it brought to the desert. But there is another legacy present here, a quieter, more insidious one. For decades after the dam was built, an unusually high number of the original workers and their families suffered from rare cancers and respiratory diseases. The silica dust that filled the air during the excavation and concrete work, the asbestos used to insulate the pipes, the various chemicals and contaminants present on a massive industrial site, these were the invisible poisons that the men took with them when they left the canyon. The long-term health consequences of building the dam are as uncounted as the immediate fatalities. The 6 companies had no long-term responsibility for the men they employed. Once a worker left the project, his health was his own problem. The illnesses that emerged years or decades later were never officially connected to their time at the dam. This epidemiological ghost story is a crucial part of the dam's legacy. It demonstrates that the cost of the project continued to be paid long after the last bucket of concrete was poured. The sacrifice was not a single heroic act, but a slow, creeping corrosion, a debt that came due in hospital wards and sickbeds far from the canyon. This delayed, invisible cost is a common feature of industrial progress. The true price is often deferred, passed on to individuals and communities in ways that are difficult to trace and easy to ignore. The Hoover Dam is a stark example of this phenomenon. We can measure the megawatts it produces with precise, satisfying numbers. We can calculate the acre-feet of water in its reservoir. But we cannot measure the accumulated years of life lost to lung disease, the pain of families who watched a loved one slowly suffocate, decades after he had been celebrated as a hero of the Depression. What the dam teaches us, then, is that the balance sheet of any great undertaking is far more complex than we admit. The profits for the 6 companies were immense and immediate. The benefits to the Southwest have been tangible and lasting. But the costs, particularly the human costs, are diffuse, delayed, and often deliberately forgotten. They are the inconvenient externalities of a system designed to produce visible, monumental results. To truly understand the dam, one must look beyond the concrete and the turbines and see the invisible infrastructure of human consequence that underpins it. One must listen for the silence where a story should be, and ask why it is not being told. The pristine facade of Boulder City and the majestic curve of the dam itself are beautiful, but they are also a form of misdirection, drawing our eyes away from the less comfortable but more complete truth. Let us return, finally, to the canyon at night. The air is still. The stars are brilliant in the dry desert sky. The great white curve of the dam is a slash of impossible geometry against the organic chaos of the rock. It feels permanent, eternal, a fixed point in a changing world. But it is not. It is a temporary structure, a human imposition on a geological timescale. The river it holds back is patient. The forces of erosion are relentless. One day, thousands or tens of thousands of years from now, the dam will be gone. The river will reclaim its canyon. The lake will drain away, revealing the silt-covered landscape of a forgotten world. The concrete will crumble, returning to the sand and gravel from which it came. What will remain? What will be the final legacy of this great and terrible monument? Perhaps it will be the faint, radioactive trace of the atomic weapons that were tested just over the horizon, a process powered by the dam's electricity. Perhaps it will be the altered genetics of the river's fish. Or perhaps the most enduring legacy will be the story itself. A story of a nation in crisis, of a wild river, of a concrete god born in the desert. A story of ambition, hubris, sacrifice, and the profound, often brutal, consequences of our attempts to reshape the world in our own image. The dam is more than a physical object. It is a myth, a story we tell ourselves about who we are. It is a story of American exceptionalism, of our power to conquer any obstacle. But it is also a story of our capacity for willful blindness, our ability to ignore the human cost of our grandest projects. To look at the dam is to see the very best and the very worst of our nature, locked together in an embrace of concrete and steel. It is a sanctuary and a cage, a source of life and a monument to death. It is the great American paradox, frozen in time, humming its low, constant, and deeply unsettling song into the vast, silent desert. The silence is the first lie. The permanence is the last.